In today's video, we will go over installing, priming, and troubleshooting a pump.
One of our main tools in the chemical industry is our metering pump, which we deliver our product with. We're going to talk to you a little today about making sure that's properly installed and operating correctly. I'd like to start with a new pump here and make sure that we get it installed so that it operates. And one of the first things to know is this pump will not lift liquid more than 5 feet. So don't mount your pump above your shoulders. The other thing is this pump has a series of valves that trap the liquid and allow it to flow in a certain direction. The first valve that comes in contact is what we call a foot valve that goes down in the very bottom of the tank to strain out any debris. And this is the first valve the pump needs to maintain prime. This valve has a ball and seat and should hang from your tubing approximately 1 inch off the bottom of your container. It's very simple to do. You simply take your clear suction tubing, hold it. This is a very simple procedure. You simply put the tubing over the cone, thread it down, and it will compress and hold. And what we want to do here is measure to just at the bottom of our pump when we were about 1 inch off the bottom of our container. Now then, the next thing that can trip you up is a nice clean cut of your tubing. If your tubing is cut on a diagonal, it may not seal. We want a nice smooth cut so that we have a nice square edge on our tubing and no place that our seal would falter. Once you have cut the suction tubing and had your foot valve to the right length so it hangs about 1 inch off the bottom of your container, you should have some kind of a weight that's designed to hold that foot valve down in the liquid and not allow it to float. The weight just slips over the tubing. That's all it's required to install that. We're going to put the tubing on the bottom of the pump. So we'll have a similar cone shape here. We'll put the nut on the tubing, slip the tubing over the cone, tighten it down, and we're now ready to put the foot valve into the pump and begin pulling liquid out. This is now the right depth. Here on top of our pump we have a priming valve. The priming valve will have 2 discharge points, one that is the pressure side back to your system, and one that will always be atmospheric, that is your return to container line. Return to container line is important because when we prime a pump, we normally prime against atmospheric pressure, which we can't do if we're pumping against the system pressure. So the other low pressure clear line can be used to return any excess chemical back to the container you're pumping it from for priming purposes. Your discharge tubing, which is high pressure, is opaque. It's quite a bit stiffer than your soft suction tubing. And once again, simply a matter of nut on tubing, tubing on cone, and tighten the nut. This tubing will be cut to length to the point of injection, but you must always use the injection fitting. This is a 1/2 inch thread, so it'll thread into any 1/2 inch opening, and this long quill can be cut off if necessary. Nut over tubing, tubing over cone, and tighten, and your pump would then be ready to prime. And for this video purpose, I'm simply going to discharge back to another container. For a new pump, all we should ever have to do is open the priming valve, And the pump should then begin to lift a little at a time until we have water or chemical coming through here, and you will see this in your return to tank discharge line. And we always want to be sure that our knobs are at 100 and 100 for priming purposes. As you can see, we're now beginning to get liquid returning back to the tank through our priming line. And this signifies that we have lifted the liquid to the diaphragm and the pump is ready to pump against pressure. At this point, you would simply close your priming valve, sealing off that avenue, and now your liquid will be forced through the high pressure tubing and into your customer's system. And again, on the first time, you'll be able to see the air bubbles and things move as the system actually primes and begins to get chemical for the first time. Sometimes when we come into our customers' accounts, we find that our pump has lost prime. This could be age, wear, dirt, the customer changing the drum, but you need to be able to tell if your pump is primed fairly quickly. The first visual indicators are your tubing. Does your discharge tubing have chemical in it? If so, does your suction tubing have chemical in it? If there's no chemical in the suction line, then obviously we won't be moving any liquid. There's 2 or 3 things you can do in a situation like that. The first is obviously to use your priming valve, just like you did when the pump was new. Simply open it, run the pump, see if the pump will prime. Occasionally, the priming valve is not enough. We have wear or tear or debris that's made its way in. Some chemicals crystallize. Various things can happen. If your priming valve will not allow you to prime the pump, a secondary method would be to take your suction line with the foot valve on it and jog it up and down. Your foot valve has a ball seat in it so that each time you move it up and down in the liquid, it forces chemical into this line, holding it here, making it easier for the pump to prime. If all else fails, we can use our Gelman syringe to pull a vacuum through the top port of your pump here before you ever remove this discharge tubing. Open your priming valve to relieve all pressure on the system, and then you can take this top nut off so that you can get to the top section of the pump. Once you have this exposed, it may be possible for you to use this to pull a vacuum, which will help your pump to prime. As you can see, we've lifted water all the way through the pump so that the pump head and diaphragm are wet. The pump should be now ready to operate. Once you have gotten water back up to the pump head so that the pump is primed, simply reassemble everything and put the pump back in service. Again, your priming valve is a very nice tool, and once we have our liquid here, we simply close it and send the liquid to the system. To summarize, your pump is like any piece of equipment. It requires proper installation and maintenance. We need to be sure that the foot valve is hanging and not laying on its side. We need to be sure we don't have any pinholes or air leaks in our suction tubing that could create air bubbles. We need to be sure that our tubing is cut flat and square for the same reason, to prevent the entry of air. And we also need to be sure that we don't mount the pump higher than 5 feet because it can't lift the product that high. If you'll do the proper installation and routine maintenance, the pump should last you for years and years. If none of these tips help you prime your pump, it's time for a maintenance repair kit. These kits are readily available and certainly make life easy to have one on the shelf for critical situations.